You just have your moment of orgasm and, oh, yeah, you've merged and it's a unitive thing. And you look at the other person and you say, I love you. It's just like looking at your mala and saying, I love you. It was a vehicle that got you to that place. And then when you begin to understand that that is the case, that all those places are the same place, and that it's a place inside you, then you say, well, now, isn't there a direct method of going to that place and staying there? And then you start to understand what brahmachari is. Because this whole process is a process of residing in that place all the time. I must explain to you that when you really understand where my guru is in what's called sahaja samadhi, that means he is in a fully realized state all the time. Now, I'll tell you exactly where he is. If you are making love to somebody, sexual love, and you are very relaxed and it's a very beautiful experience and you get very close, and as you approach the moment of orgasm, there is a merging experience. So that instead of being her and me, or, the other person and the self, there's just the experience. And there are so many arms maybe and so many legs, but even those may be gone, and there's just the feeling of the experience, and both people are merged in that place. Right? And if your sex is particularly good, you are in that place and you try to maintain that place because that's the highest peak. It's the blissful union, the yin-yang merger. The polarities have come together. If at that place you pull your head back from your beloved to look at your beloved, in other words, you go back into the polarity to love the beloved as a separate entity, only to go back into the merger. You understand that place where you just keep going like, it's just that's where he lives. That's where he lives. His beloved is God. And he goes right in and out of that little place. It's just like, but it's like at the rate of breathing. The rate of breathing. It's going into the union, back to the duality, back into form to formless, back to form, right at that edge. Right at that edge. He just comes back into form enough, keeps the body going, and it comes back to worship. See? Okay. I want to make the parallels between the sexual gratifications, which are usually genital sexual, but in Westerners that are very sophisticated and have worked much on opening themselves up sexually, gets so that it is not any longer genital sexuality, but total in the Freudian sense of everything becomes sexual, erogenous zone. The whole body and the whole mind becomes an erogenous zone, one large erogenous zone, and people are just merged in a sexual union. Well, that place is the place we're talking about. I used to kid. I didn't understand, you see, before I went to India. I remember giving a lecture, and I remember saying, there are some of these yogis in India who go sit in a mountain and they sit cross-legged and you feel poor guys, there they are all alone. But man, they're just like in orgasm all the time. And everybody laughed and I laughed and it was all very funny because I didn't believe it. Now that I know how Shakti and Shiva merge through Kundalini, and now I know it from inside, now it's quite a different matter. Quite a different matter. All right, in pranayama, I'll talk more about what you do about the sexual energy. Let me just deal with the other things in yama. Now, the implication of non-killing is interesting because I wear leather sandals, but these leather sandals come from the Gandhi ashram in Delhi, which are made from cows that died naturally. See? Every time a cow dies on the street, they call up the Gandhi ashram and they send a truck over and they take it and they make sandals out of it for nuts like me. And it's like my teachers, the way he started to teach me about this, he wrote on his slate, snakes know heart. Meaning, when you're pure of heart, when you don't mean harm to anything, you don't have to worry about snakes because they are appreciative of where you're at, right? They won't do you in unless they feel a threat from you. And that is the reason why part of the reason why I am on the diet I am on, which is a vegetarian diet. Because they feel, and I do what I'm told, but they feel that since you are what you eat, and since the cells of animals that die violently have all the chemicals that are released at the time of violent death, fear and anxiety and so on, that this does affect the constituency, the components, the composition of your cellular body, and as your consciousness gets finer and finer, then what you are made up of is your environment in which that consciousness is dwelling. It's the temple in which you are living. And if that temple is full of those kinds of vibrations, it's at a much finer level of energy than gross body level, the finer level of energy. If your body is made up of that, it's going to bring you down. It's going to catch you up. It's going to create a bad environment in which to work. Non-killing, non-stealing, and non-receiving of gifts, there's another element of them that's very interesting, which is very relevant here in the West. And that is the degree into which, and truth is part of it also, the degree to which one sees any other individual as object in relation to oneself. That the polarities that we exist in the West have gotten to be such that we create our polar opposite all the time. I know many of you will feel uncomfortable when I say this, but the hippies create the police as much as the police create the hippies. That the liberals create the conservatives. The protesters create the John Birchers just as much as the John Birchers create the protesters. That as long as you are attached to whatever pole you are representing, the vibrations which you are sending out are creating its polar opposite around you. If you can do whatever is your karma, which may be walking in a protest march or fighting in Vietnam or being a conservative or a liberal or being a housewife or being a yogi, and can do it without attachment and do it fully and thoroughly but without attachment, then you do not create that karma. You do not create the polar opposite. And therefore, what they are saying is that if that certain acts have in them the implicit recognition of treating other people as object, when you steal from somebody else, when you harm somebody else, because you're harming yourself. But the key one that we Westerners have to explore is the one of truthfulness. Because I realized finally that there was nowhere to hide, that I could not afford any longer not to tell the truth. That the subtle kind of deception that we impose upon ourselves had to go. Had to go. I've got a new routine now. When people come to visit me up at my cabin up in New Hampshire, I say to them, I'm not interested in social visits if we're working together, and I demand in this situation total truth. And I say, is there anything you can think of that you can't tell me? Anything you can think of. It's like, don't think of rhinoceros. Is there anything you can think of that you can't tell me? Well, one guy thinks I look like an ape, so he doesn't want to tell me that. Another guy's got some sexual hang-up. He doesn't want to tell me that. I say, well, if you can't trust me enough to share all that with me, if you think I'm still at the place where I'm going to hurt you or you feel hurtable, then we're not ready to work together. Now, the implications of that are this. Sounds like John Kennedy. I want to say this about that. That just like I said at the outset of the lecture, the geese do not mean to cast their image, nor the water to receive their reflection, nor the water to receive their image. When somebody visits me, I am being the witness, that place which is independent of personality and individual difference, and I am trying to make contact with that place and that other person. And at that place, there is no game involved. There's nothing he can do to me or I can do to him. That was the place I went to in that session. How can you hurt me? Kill my body? That's your karma, not mine. Truthfulness is perhaps one of the most profound ones for the Westerners to understand, because our level of paranoia is so deep-seated, so profound. You know, when I went to India, I couldn't believe those people were really existing. In the villages, they are so pure. They are really so pure. Like somebody would walk 10 miles out to the temple to bring me some fruit, just because they wanted me to have it. And what would I do as a Westerner? I'd think, well, what's in it for them? What do they want from me? I couldn't accept the fact that a person could be doing that pure an act just out of a feeling of wanting to do it. And when I first read the Ramayana, the story of Ram, it was at a time, a yuga, when things were much purer, not the Kali Yuga we're living in now, that he was an incarnation in the Sat Yuga. And his life is such a reflection of purity that I would cry at such purity, because I had never met anybody that pure. I couldn't even conceive of anybody being that pure. I mean, it was just like it blew my mind when they didn't ask me for a contract at the temple, when they didn't ask me to pay for my food or my clothing. You know, well, what am I getting into here? That was one voice in me saying, the other voice saying, baby, are you paranoid? And watching those layers of paranoia like an onion just being taken away one by one as they were making me naked so that my heart could be that open, so that I could really be there with another consciousness, because I started to live in the place where there was nothing you could do to me. And when there's nothing you can do to me, I can be totally here for you. Because I'm not vulnerable. I'm not going to be hurt. There's no risk. There's no risk at all. And when you once know where that place is with another human being, you realize you can't afford not to have it, because you're just gypping yourself so badly. I can tell when somebody comes to see me, I look into their eyes, you see, now. In the old days, when I'd look into somebody's eyes, it was a power play. You know? Want to control them or show them how deep I was, or look to see what they were, I was doing something. Now I look at somebody's eyes and I'm doing mantra. I'm just empty. But I'm really here. And I can feel their eyes, and sometimes you look into somebody's eyes and it's like a deep bottomless well, and they're just there at every level. Every level you touch upon, they're there. They're just so, it's just pure consciousness that you meet. And others, you go just so far and you feel a level drop, because it's too risky to get in that close. I mean, I just met you. How can I be in love with you? And I only look that way at people I'm in, that kind of thing. And to realize that that place that you are, which is pure consciousness, which is, I'll play a little game with you and give you the clues. It's light, it's energy, it's also love. It's the same exact place. It's Purusha. It's pure energy. It's the same place in you as it is in me. And when we look that way, we are in that place together. And then we are both witnessing all the rest of our acts, which is all out there from this other place. That's only if you can be truthful. If you figure you got to hide from me, you're still attached to your self-image, which has some secrets going. You've got some closed doors in your head. And all I'm saying is we cannot afford the closed doors anymore. I can't anyway. Everything in my life's an open book. You can ask me anything. I'll tell you all my perverse sexual experiences, if there's a Freudian here that wants to play. Because it doesn't mean a damn thing to me anymore. It's, that's Richard Alpert, man. Poor hung-up cat. Poor hung-up cat. What a hard life he was leading. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life being attached to an old model and have it hold me down. It's not worth it, even though there's all this social impropriety in being identified with it. Tough. Now, to shift gears for a second, every morning I got up at around 4:30 or 5, would go to the river to bathe, meaning pouring cold water in a lota over oneself in the dark. This is up in the Himalayas, so the temperature is sometimes 30, or, it's not Tibet, but it's chilly. You're barefoot, right, in the snow and stuff. It's interesting. You develop a thing called dumo, which is body heat, which is a way of working with the inner thing so you create the heat. And for example, one of the Tibetan initiations about dumo in the Tibetan sects is when a guy is really ready for the initiation, they take the group out to a riverbank in the sub-zero wind, and they sit naked by the river, and they dip sheets into the river and they cut a hole in the ice, dip sheets in them, and put the sheets on the backs of these guys, and how many they can dry with their own body during the night is the measure of how high they are when they pass that initiation. 2 glasses of milk a day, internal heat. Where's it all leading? What have we Westerners been doing all this time? What do we think this body's all about? I met a yogi who had been buried alive for 3 years. It's like a siddhi, it's a power, it's a little feat. It's like being a high wire walker. I mean, it doesn't take you to enlightenment. He wakes up at the end of 3 years, he's just where he was when he went to sleep. However, it's impressive. And his arm was all eaten away because they hadn't packed him right, and the ants had eaten away one arm. And I talked to him about, I talked with the people that were there about how he did it. And I was told that the only amount of oxygen you need really is for your brain cells and your heart muscle. And that your cells store plenty of oxygen for that purpose. And that's why when you do go into samadhi, you do stop breathing. And when I first started to do pranayama and went through that little place, which I'll tell you about in a minute, it scared me because in my model, you don't stop breathing. That's it for your body. All right, after the bath, back into by the little coal stove, coal brazier. Then breathing exercises, pranayama, and asanas, meaning hatha yoga. Then chai, tea, by around 7:30. Then I usually would read something from the Gita or from the Tao or from some holy book. I was only allowed to read the books of realized beings. And that's a very subtle and interesting point. See, when you read a book written by a guy who's writing about realization, what you're really getting from him is all the reasons why he isn't a realized being. See? I mean, some of the great Westerners that are writing beautiful, insightful books about Eastern method, all they're really doing at the vibrational level is they're taking people on their own trip as to why they're not the realized being themselves. And therefore, rather than being typhoid Tessie, that kind of carrier, and getting involved in that, the rule of the game is you read only books written by people who made it. You can read the writings of Ramakrishna, you can read the writings of Ramana Maharshi, you can read the writings of Gautama Buddha, you can read the writings of Christ, you can read the writings of Krishna and Ram and so on. All the rishis in India. Yeah. But you don't read all the ones that we would look to as really good books in the field. Good books in the field. That's study, which is part of niyama, which is part of the second arm. So I'd read a little bit of something maybe from the book of Tao, and then I would reflect on it for a while, and then go into a formal meditation for about an hour, which I'll explain later. Then around 11, I'd write a little bit for an hour. I was sort of writing notes and ideas and working on a little book, I guess. Then around 12, my meal was placed outside the door. Sometimes at around 11, instead of writing, the teacher would come and he'd teach me for an hour or so. We'd sit with chalkboards talking to one another and he'd be teaching me. He'd like say, if you wear leather on your feet, the whole world is covered with leather. So he'd write that first. So I'd think about that, and makes pretty good sense. Everywhere you walk is leather. You're wearing leather on your feet. You think it's you, but it's just the shoes, it's your foot. Yeah. Then he'd say, if you think of God, everywhere there's God. Same way. In other words, then he would say, desire is the trap. Desirelessness is moksha, meaning liberation. Desire is the creator. Desire is the destroyer. Desire is the universe. And what he was saying to me is, your desires create your universe. You desire sexual gratification, you live in a world full of sex. You desire peace militantly, you live in a militant world. When you are a peaceful being, you live in a peaceful universe. Because the vibrations that go out from you are peaceful, and the people that are involved in them experience greater feelings of wanting to be peaceful. It's simple as it's the way it works. It's the same thing that Buddha had said, you see, in his Four Noble Truths. He went and he sat under the Bodhi tree and he came back and he said, well, here's the way it is, everybody. I can put it down in 4 statements. So simple. All life is suffering. Birth is suffering. Death is suffering. Growing old is suffering. Not getting what you want is suffering. Getting what you don't want is suffering. Even getting what you want is suffering because you're going to lose it. The greatest pleasure, your body at the height of its thing is going to grow old. Your physical beauty is going to pass. Your intellect's going to fail. All suffering. Everywhere you look is suffering. I said all life is suffering. Number 2 is the cause of suffering is craving. If you want something and you can't have it, then you suffer. Third noble truth, and these are pretty noble. Third noble truth is give up craving, end suffering. It's like an elementary school book. Desire creates the universe, my teacher says. Buddha says, give up craving, end suffering. You don't desire a universe, the external universe doesn't exist. And the 4th noble truth is the Eightfold Path of how to get beyond attachment or desire. And the Eightfold Path is very similar to Raja Yoga. Then my 1 meal a day was brought to me at around noon. Now this meal consisted primarily of grains. It was called kejri, which is a combination of rice and dal, which is like a lentil. And now and then there was sabji or a vegetable. And a chapati, which is made of whole wheat flour and water. So that was it. That was my food for the day. Now, the way you work in doing sadhana is that every act you perform becomes a method of taking you to this other state of consciousness. You're trying to change your vantage point, your perceptual vantage point, and everything you do has got to be a device to help you get to that place. From a Western point of view, you're doing a complete cognitive reorganization. You're changing your reference point. You're changing the core concept around which the whole constellation of thought is built. And therefore, you have to take every act and redefine it and develop new habits of thought for thinking about it. So, I'll give you an example. You take a piece of food like this. You're offered food. Now, in the old days, you'd sit down, and sometimes when you got into these particularly phony families, they'd say grace. And it was like, all right, come on already. And at great functions, they'd say long graces, Rabbis would get up and go on for long periods of time and so on, and they'd bless Lyndon Johnson in the Vietnam War, and, they do the whole trip, right? Brahmarpanam, Brahmahavir, Brahmagni, Brahmanahota, Brahmaitan, Gantabhyam, Brahma, Karma, Samadhina, Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat, Param Brahma Tasmai, Shri Guru Venamaha, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Translation? First thing is, this ritual that I am going through now is Brahma. In other words, now I got to stop for a moment for those of you that are new in this game to explain the meaning of Brahma. Here is the gross universe. Your bodies, this table, this microphone, it's all gross, coming through your senses, right? Gross energy. Slowed down, way slowed down. Mass energy, you all understand that, so we can go through that quickly. Then you get to finer energies like thought. That's just energy slowed down less. It's faster, finer, faster and finer. Light is such an energy. Keep going finer and finer and finer until you get to the unit of energy which is so fine, or the unit of stuff, you can call it, that is so fine that it's interchangeable in everything in the universe. It's what the air is made up of, it's what light's made up of, it's what thought's made up of, it's what gross things are made up of, right? That all is still form. It's still in the form of energy. It's just very fine energy. It's called prakriti in the particular system, the Hindu system, this particular Patanjali system. Prakriti is the finest level of form, the converse side of which is the formless. That is the akash, or that place where it all is behind form. Now, if you just think of this as a set of levels, hypothetically for the moment, if you haven't experienced these, and if you've watched it all happen, it's one thing, but if not, theoretically you go through these levels. So you go gross, finer, 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 to the finest type of stuff, and then all of that is contained within and is the opposite side of and is in continuous cycle of emerging and disappearing with that which is formless, which is behind it. That which is formless, which is behind it, which contains all, is what's called Brahma. It's called the Akash, it's called Purusha, it's got lots and lots of names to it. And that place which is behind is stable, it's always the same, it's never changing, and all the stuff when it comes down into form, when the Prakriti starts to work and creates manifestations, that's all sort of like illusion. It's just happening and all going back into this place, which always is, and all of this is it in a solid form. Solid nothingness, or fullness, however you want to play it. Doesn't mean empty, as you can understand, because it's everything. It's everything and nothing. It's all and everything. It's the clear white light. It's the, right? Except it's beyond that. It's beyond any polarities, any labels, it's not white because it's not dark, it's not anything. It's everything.